Imagine walking into a hospital where the lights flicker, the machines are outdated, and the walls carry the scars of neglect. Yet in the middle of that brokenness stands one doctor, exhausted but unshaken, fighting to keep the hospital alive. This is not a story of grand medical institutions or state-of-the-art facilities. This is the story of India's rural doctors, the men and women who refuse to let entire communities collapse into silence. The backbone of rural healthcare in India rests upon the shoulders of doctors who work in places where most people would never willingly go. In the bustling cities, one may find gleaming hospitals, advanced equipment, and teams of specialists ready to respond. But in the remote corners of the country, especially in villages and rural districts, there is often only one overworked doctor who carries the entire weight of survival for thousands of people. These doctors are more than medical professionals. They are the final line of defense against disease, childbirth complications, infections, and untreated injuries. When an accident happens on a dirt road miles from the nearest town, it is the rural doctor who decides whether someone lives or dies. When a mother goes into labor at midnight with no access to proper maternity wards, it is the rural doctor who must deliver the baby with whatever limited tools are at hand. The hospital may not look like a hospital in the modern sense. It could be a small building with peeling paint, outdated machines, and electricity that comes and goes. Yet because of the presence of doctors, it becomes a beacon of hope. In places where infrastructure is weak and government attention is thin, these doctors are often the only reason that health facilities remain alive. Imagine a hospital without them. No one to diagnose a fever that could be malaria. No one to recognize the signs of tuberculosis. No one to stabilize a child suffering from severe dehydration during a summer heatwave. The building might still stand, but without doctors, it would be nothing more than a hollow shell, another abandoned structure in the long list of failed promises. The doctors transform this reality. They bring knowledge, judgment, and humanity into environments that otherwise feel forgotten. Their presence creates trust between rural communities and modern medicine. Villagers often walk for hours, sometimes even days, just to reach a rural hospital, and when they arrive, they don't come for machines or government posters. They come for the doctor, because it is the doctor who listens, decides, and acts. This role becomes even more vital when epidemics spread. Rural India has faced repeated waves of disease outbreaks, from encephalitis to dengue, and every time the Frontline is not the glamorous research institutes or private hospitals, but the rural doctors stationed in these vulnerable areas. They are the ones who isolate patients, manage medicines, and prevent small outbreaks from turning into disasters. Without their vigilance, villages could turn into graveyards long before help from the outside world arrives. Rural doctors stand as guardians of life in an environment where the margin between survival and catastrophe is dangerously thin. Their constant battle against the odds, their commitment despite exhaustion, and their ability to keep hospitals functional under dire circumstances is the reason why rural healthcare, fragile as it is, continues to breathe in India's vast and overlooked landscapes. 4 states in India stand out as striking examples of what rural doctors mean to survival: Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Odisha. These are not places with endless resources or fully equipped medical facilities, but states where poverty, geography, and underdeveloped infrastructure have made healthcare one of the most fragile systems in daily life. In these regions, rural hospitals are not simply part of the health sector. They are the only wall between communities and collapse. If the doctors who chose to serve here walked away, the hospitals would become abandoned halls, and millions of people would be left with no access to even basic care. The strength of these states' fragile healthcare systems is held together almost entirely by the determination of doctors who refuse to let their patients down. Take Bihar, for instance, a state where floods regularly cut off villages from major towns, and where the poorest households often cannot afford to travel long distances for treatment. In those conditions, rural hospitals become the only option. Without doctors in those facilities, diseases like malaria, diarrheal outbreaks, and malnutrition would sweep through entire communities unchecked. Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state, tells another story. With over 200 million people, the pressure on healthcare is immense, and in rural districts, overcrowded hospitals with limited resources are the norm. It is the doctors who prevent those facilities from collapsing entirely under the weight of patients arriving daily. Their presence means that a farmer injured in a field accident, a child suffering from pneumonia, or a mother in labor at midnight still has a fighting chance. Madhya Pradesh, with its sprawling tribal belt and villages scattered across forested areas, faces the challenge of distance. Many communities are isolated, sometimes by hours of difficult travel. If not for rural doctors stationed in local hospitals, those populations would effectively be cut off from healthcare altogether. These doctors often work without modern equipment, improvising with what they have, but their presence is enough to keep death at bay. Odisha tells yet another story of dependence, where the coastal state's vulnerability to cyclones and natural disasters makes medical access a matter of life and death. Rural hospitals, often battered by storms, continue functioning because doctors stay back even when everyone else leaves. Their courage ensures that after every disaster, medical aid flows immediately to those who need it most. Each of these states would have seen their healthcare networks collapse under the strain of poverty, population pressure, and weak governance if not for these doctors. They do not merely treat patients, they sustain the very idea of healthcare in places where policy has failed and infrastructure lags far behind. They keep the lights on, both literally and metaphorically, in hospitals that would otherwise be graveyards of broken promises. Their collective effort is what keeps millions alive in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Odisha, making them the silent architects of survival in India's most vulnerable landscapes. The story of doctors who serve in rural India is not one of money, comfort, or recognition, but of sacrifice that goes far beyond salary. In the big cities, doctors may earn handsome paychecks, work with advanced equipment, and practice in environments that allow them to focus on one specialty, but in the villages of Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, or Odisha, the reality is completely different. Here, doctors often work for wages that barely reflect the gravity of the responsibility they carry. They are sometimes the only trained physician for tens of thousands of people scattered across dusty villages and remote hamlets. And yet they continue to show up every single day. What drives them is not financial reward, but a deep sense of duty, an understanding that without them, there would be no one else to step in. Their sacrifice is not just about money, it is about the time, energy, and even personal well-being they give up to keep rural hospitals alive. Working in under-equipped facilities is perhaps the hardest part of their job. Imagine having to treat a complicated childbirth without proper surgical equipment or diagnosing a disease when basic lab tests are unavailable. Rural doctors face this reality every day. They are forced to improvise, to find solutions where the system gives them none. They make do with limited medicines, often having to choose carefully which drugs to prioritize when supplies run out. They learn to manage with erratic electricity, sometimes conducting procedures by torchlight during power cuts. They endure sleepless nights not because they are on scheduled duty, but because patients keep arriving long after hours. A road accident in the middle of the night, a woman in labor during a storm, or a child burning with fever, there is no option to say no. Their lives are shaped by constant interruptions and relentless responsibility. And yet, despite all this, they rarely receive acknowledgement. The headlines celebrate urban hospitals and elite surgeons, but the rural doctor remains invisible, known only to the villagers who depend on them. Their sacrifice extends to their personal lives as well, because many of them live far away from their families, cut off from the comforts of urban living. Some miss out on opportunities for career advancement because they choose to serve in rural hospitals instead of pursuing high-paying positions in big cities. Many endure loneliness, isolation, and even health risks of their own, but they carry on because they know their absence would mean catastrophe for their patients. This sacrifice has a ripple effect that extends far beyond individual cases. By staying in these rural hospitals, doctors stabilize entire communities. They prevent epidemics from spreading, they save newborns who grow up to become part of the next generation, and they offer hope in places where despair could have easily taken over. Their commitment gives these states a fragile but vital lifeline, holding together healthcare systems that might otherwise collapse. They remind us that true service is not measured in salary slips or awards, but in the lives saved against overwhelming odds. India's rural healthcare system is a structure that often appears strong on paper but crumbles under scrutiny, and the only reason it continues to function at all is because of the doctors who hold it up like pillars against collapse. Policies are drafted, statistics are presented, and officials often speak of the number of hospitals, clinics, and primary health centers spread across the country. But what those numbers do not reveal is the emptiness of these institutions without doctors who choose to stay and serve. These men and women are the unsung heroes who bridge the vast gulf between promises made in government reports and the brutal reality faced by villagers in some of India's poorest and most remote corners. Without their resilience, the cracks in the system would widen until nothing remained but failed infrastructure and abandoned buildings. When one walks into a rural hospital in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, or Odisha, the first impression is not of technology or modernity, but of scarcity. There may be only a handful of beds, few functional machines, and often no specialist staff. Yet, even in this environment, patients line up, sometimes stretching into courtyards and dusty roads outside. They do not come because the hospital offers advanced facilities. They come because a doctor is there. The doctor becomes the institution. He or she listens, diagnoses, prescribes, and comforts in an environment where resources are minimal. This transformation of a weak system into a functioning lifeline is a direct result of human grit, not administrative strength. Every prescription written in these hospitals is a defiance of failure. Every successful delivery of a child, a refusal to let the cracks win. The irony is that the system often takes these doctors for granted. They are expected to work in environments that lack equipment, medicines, and sometimes even basic hygiene. They face overwhelming patient loads, often hundreds in a single day, while battling exhaustion and emotional strain. And yet, they continue because they understand the cost of stopping. If one rural doctor were to leave, hundreds or even thousands of people could suddenly find themselves without access to medical care. In areas where there is no alternative, that absence could mean death. It is not policy that keeps these hospitals alive. It is the presence of individuals who refuse to abandon their posts. These unsung heroes rarely see their stories told beyond the walls of their hospitals. Their contribution goes unnoticed in the national narrative, overshadowed by urban advancements and political slogans. But ask a mother whose child's life was saved from pneumonia in a village clinic, or a farmer who survived a snake bite because the local doctor treated him immediately, and the truth becomes clear. These doctors are the only barrier between life and death for millions. They embody resilience in the face of neglect, dedication in the face of scarcity, and courage in the face of impossible odds. It is because of them that India's rural healthcare system still breathes, fragile but alive, a heartbeat sustained by sacrifice and service. The truth is simple yet profound. India's rural healthcare system survives not because of policy documents or political speeches, but because of the doctors who choose to stay where hope is scarce. They are the silent guardians who turn crumbling hospitals into sanctuaries of survival. Without them, states like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Odisha would have seen their fragile health networks collapse long ago. Their sacrifice is invisible in headlines, but it is visible in every child who recovers, every mother who survives childbirth, and every villager who walks out alive. They prove that even in the darkest corners, one person's determination can hold back the collapse of an entire system. They are not just healers, they are the heartbeat of rural India, keeping the nation's most vulnerable alive when everything else has failed them.